Okay, this morning if you turn to Romans the 3rd chapter, why we're ready to begin to resume our study of this particular chapter. And now then, we're down into verse 21. When you get down to this section, you're getting right into the very heart of the book of Romans. It is amazing when you look at what Paul has done from verses 21 through the end of the chapter, which is down to verse 31. So you have 11 verses, and he has taken the entirety of the gospel of Christ, the entirety, really, of the salvation in Christ. He's wrapped it all up, and he's put it in those particular verses. When we get these verses, if we actually understand them, comprehend them, know what they really say, we really have the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's just amazing, as you'll see as we go through it. One word after another that just packed full of great meaning. So in this particular section, we're going to go as slow as we need to go. I would rather take 24 weeks in these verses and then go ahead with the rest of the book in another 3 weeks than I would to turn it around. Because unless we get these verses, then the other verses in the book of Romans are not going to be as meaningful as what these are. So I'm trying to set the stage so that we can see that we're in some very, very meaty, meaningful verses at this time. Now, we've looked at this and we've seen chapter 1 is showing that the Gentiles need to be saved. Chapters 2 and 3 show that the Jews need to be saved. We've looked about the law, of what the law was all about. And now then we're down to verse 21. Now here is a little statement that we're going to stop and we're going to work on for just a moment. He says, but now apart from the law. Now stop right there. Why would he say, now apart from the law? Why wouldn't he say, now apart from Rome? Or now apart from, and then bring out anything he wants to bring out. Why did he say, now apart from the law? What made the law so important? See? What was it that the Jews were putting their hope in? They had their entire hope in the fact that they were Jews. God had called Abraham, brought him on down, and God had given the Jews the law. So you see how important we Jews are. We have the law. So we're going to be saved just because of our relationship with God in this sense. So for us today, for you and me here in Monroe, I don't think it's possible for us to comprehend how important that law was to the Jews. A great amount of the New Testament is written, Galatians, Ephesians, and Colossians, and so forth, to show us that we are not saved by the law. It's written to show us how the law is related to the gospel of Jesus Christ, wherein we are saved. So now, as we think about the law, that doesn't mean much to us because we're not Jews. We haven't depended on the law all of our life. But now he's here is telling us what you Jews have depended on for all of your life. That is not salvation. That doesn't bring you any salvation. So he says now, apart from the law, separate and apart from the law. You're going to have to set that aside. A righteousness of God hath been manifested. Now, the word manifested means made known. So what is it that's made known? A righteousness of God is made known. Now, that term, righteousness of God, is again very important because it's going to be used over and over again in the book of Romans. Righteousness of God. What does that mean? Now, on first glance, as you look at it, righteousness of God might sound like that we're talking about how righteous God is. Isn't that true? As you just read it, you think, well, that's telling us about how righteous God is. Now there's one time in here that's going to be talking about this. But what this is talking about here, righteousness of God, means how God made us righteous. How did God make Jew and Gentile righteous? Chapters up to this time has shown both Jew and Gentile are in sin. They need to be saved. Now as we go back to chapter 1, verse 17, we spend a lot of time there because it's the very theme of the book. It's what the whole book is about. It's everything in the book of Romans is wrapped up here. For therein, now he just got through talking about the gospel. For therein, in the gospel, is revealed a righteousness of God from faith unto faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Now what he's saying there is this. For in the gospel, we have made known to us how God makes man righteous. And God makes man righteous by faith. That's what the book of Romans is going to be about. It is how does he make us righteous? He makes us righteous by faith. So righteousness of God, when you see it, that's how God makes us righteous. Look here at what he says in this verse. But now apart from the law, a righteousness of God hath been manifested. That means separate and apart from the law, the old law. The way God makes us righteous has been made known. You don't have to go back to the old law to find how God makes us righteous. Separate and apart from that old law, we can read the gospel, and there we learn how God makes us righteous. Now, in verse 22, it says, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ. So, we take righteousness of God. It said, the way God makes us righteous is through faith in Jesus Christ. So that term, righteousness of God, we can see what it is. In chapter 10, verse 3, for being ignorant of God's righteousness, now, here later on, he's talking to the Jews. And he's telling about the Jews, what they did. Now, the Jews were ignorant of the way God made a man righteous. If you'd talked to any Jew in the first century time, or at any other time, and you said, how does God make man righteous? They would say, well, because we are of Abraham's seed and we have the law. And so we're made righteous in that way. So Paul is saying, they being ignorant of God's righteousness, they didn't understand, and seeking to establish their own. Now they didn't understand how God made a man righteous, so they were seeking to establish their own way of making a man righteous, and they did not submit themselves or subject themselves to the righteousness of God. So since they didn't understand the way God makes us righteous, they set up a system whereby they could be made righteous, and then by following their own man-made system, they didn't submit to the way God made a man righteous. Now really, when you go back to the very beginning of this whole thing, as you go back and you come to Abraham, what was it about Abraham? That's way back there, isn't it? That's back there 400 years before the law. What was there about Abraham that God made Abraham righteous? It said he made him righteous. What was it about him? Was it because he worked so hard? Was it because he left the Ur of the Chaldees? Was it because? What was it? Was it because? What was it? One word. Why did God make Abraham righteous? It's faith. That was it. Faith didn't start in the gospel. Faith started way back there. God made him righteous by faith. And God was demanding faith all the way through, even during the time of the law. God demanded faith. But the Jews missed that. The Jews missed it, and the Jews thought God makes us righteous because of who we are or what we do. And so Paul then said they were ignorant of how God does it in there. So now, let's come back to this. But now apart from the law, a righteousness of God hath been made known, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. Well, when we put our chart up there that we've had up there before, we go down and we see that as you start out with mankind in the Garden of Eden. Finally, there in the gray, God calls Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldees, and then he gives him the law. And last week we learned what that law was all about. That law was a tutor, and that law really had one purpose. What was the purpose of that law? It was to bring the Jews unto Christ. That was the purpose of the law. You say, well, how could the law bring the Jews unto Christ? Well, the law was given 1,600 years before Christ. And you remember last week when we studied and we saw over in Galatians 3 why God gave the law to start with? God had given a promise to Abraham about 2000 BC. Then about 1600 BC, God gave the law. Now, why did God add the law to the promise? And we learned in Galatians 3, it was because of sin. Now, when God called Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldees, started out, Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs. What kind of people were they, morally speaking? Or as far as their attitude toward God, were they sinless or were they a terribly sinful nation? They were a terribly sinful nation. You read about those old patriarchs, and my oh my, who was it that kidnapped Joseph, threw him in the pit, and then finally sold him? Who was that? That was the patriarchs. That was his brothers. Who was it that committed adultery? You remember there, and she came back and showed him, "You're the man." It was the patriarchs. Who was it that lied to the people? The people there in Canaan, when they walked in, and these people came to them and said, "Now, we want to be at peace with you guys. We want to trade with you. We want to be at peace. We want to trade with you Jews." And so then they said, "Well, okay. Okay." They said, "We want to marry your daughters. You can marry our daughters. We want to be at peace." Now, these were the Canaanites. These were the ugly, old, mean, terrible Canaanites. Remember them? See? Now this was the first part of this thing, see? They said, okay. Then they said, now, before we can do that, though, you have to be circumcised. You Canaanites have to be circumcised. Because we can't marry anybody who's not circumcised. Our women can't. So these guys said, well, okay. So they took the whole city, whole country, and circumcised them all in one day. And then the next day, when these men were unable to walk, what did the patriarchs do? What did the 12 tribes do? Went in and killed them, wiped them out. Who do you suppose was the most righteous on that day? Those mean old Canaanites or those nice patriarchs? No. So what I'm trying to do is paint a picture so that you can see in here that the patriarchs of the Old Testament in here, they weren't the nice people that we think they were that was there. And God then came along, and what did God do to solve that problem? The patriarchs, after God called Moses out and so forth, or called Abraham out and brought him down, how did God solve the sin problem? They were so sinful. What? The law. He said, okay, you people are so sinful, I now am going to give you the law. And this law is going to hold you under control. So here's what you're going to do. So God gave them the law. And in the law, He dealt with their morality. He dealt with their civil law. He dealt with their religious law. Every day of their life, they had to get out of bed and read that law and do what that law told them to do. So he said, I'm going to tell you everything about your life. Here's what you're going to do. And then he says, he did it in order to keep them under control until Christ came. See? So to bring Christ in here. So now, the law was given because of sin. The law was given because that nation was such a sinful nation, not because they were such a righteous nation. But now, during that period of time, when God gave them the law, and he gave them the prophets, did the prophets live under the law? Yeah, they lived after the law was given. He gave them the law and the prophets, and while that law was controlling the Jews, God also would prophesy about the Christ and about what Christ was going to do and how Christ would save mankind. And it prophesied and it told about how Christ would do that. So, the law is preparing the Jews. The law is teaching the Jews. The law is controlling the Jews and keeping them out of sin. And it's teaching them about the Christ. It says, here's what you look for. Here's what he is. Here's what he's going to do. So now, that's what it means when it says, now apart from the law, a righteousness of God hath been manifested. Separate apart from the law, God's made known a way to make man righteous. And that way to make man righteous has been witnessed by the law and the prophets. The law and the prophets prophesied and said, here's what you're going to do. So that's the thing that he's doing. Now, notice how he's making a distinction. And he's cutting it the difference between the old law, of which the Jews put their absolute, total trust in, and this new system of religion that is a righteousness of God. Now, in this new system, the way God makes a man righteous, we've already found out in Romans chapter 1 and verses 15 and 16 where you learn it. What was it Paul said? For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, see, for therein. And so he told them, that's where you find this, is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, the law, they prophesied about this. Notice. And he said unto them, now this would be Jesus, these are my words which I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must needs be fulfilled which are written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me. So Jesus said, if you go back to the old law, and you'll read that old law and the Psalms and the prophets, you read the Old Testament, what will you learn in the Old Testament? Will you learn how to be righteous? No. You're going to learn about me. See, that's what Christ said. You're going to learn about me. And I'm here to tell you how to be righteous by faith. Again, Paul stood up and he said, I stand unto this day testifying both to small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses did say should come. Paul said, while I'm out here preaching the gospel, I'm not telling you anything but what Moses and the prophets have already told you 400 years ago. That's all I'm telling you. I'm not here to tell you a new doctrine. I'm here to tell you what the law and the prophets were telling you. If you'd just listened to them, if you'd obeyed them, you'd have listened to them, you would understand. You'd understand. Because what was the purpose of the law again? It was to bring the Jews unto Christ. So if you had listened to that law, you would have been ready and prepared. And when Jesus came on the scene, he's born in the right city, he's born in the right tribe, he's born at the right time, he's raised in the right way, he died, he rose, he was buried in the right way, in a tomb by himself, and on you go. And a little while, you stop and you say, hey, this has to be the Christ. Why? because this man fulfills everything that the law said. See? And so the Jews had all of that. But what did the Jews do with it? They set it aside. They were making up a law or a righteousness of their own. That's what Paul said. Being ignorant of God's righteousness, they made up their own righteousness. So they made it up that is in there. And then again, Paul said, he said, so serve I the God of our fathers, believing all things which are according to the law and which are written in the prophets. So you see what he's saying in there, the law and the prophets, they witnessed this righteousness of God. So now then, we're going to be talking about this righteousness of God. And Paul's point at this time, now he said it a whole lot faster than I have, right? How long would it take you to read that verse up there? What, 4.5 seconds if you read it slowly? How long have I been talking about it now? 2 hours? He did it a whole lot faster than I did it. But as you look at it, if you believe that law and the prophets, then you're ready to accept this new system here, which is the system which is by faith, you see. Now, let's look at it then in this way. Let's start breaking it down. But now, apart from the law. So first of all, separate apart from that law, we're going to look at a righteousness of God. Now, back under the old law, that system to make you righteous, for you to be righteous, back under the law, we learned of this in Ephesians 3 last week. What does it take? If you said, I'm going to take the law and I'm going to be a righteous person, what would it take? Perfection. Perfect obedience. Had the Jews taken the law and had they obeyed the law without making any mistakes, no sins, what kind of people would they have been? Perfect. What one individual came, lived under the law, never broke the law, obeyed it perfectly? Only one, Jesus Christ himself. So now, that's what you had to do. You had to be absolutely, totally perfect. And then you'd be righteous. What do you call a person who's never, ever, ever made a mistake? He's a righteous individual. Well, that's what it took under the law. Now, over here, under this other system, this new system depends on God's grace and your faith. In other words, God now, as we're going to read about, is setting up a system because of the grace of God. And we'll learn these terms and so forth, but what does grace mean to start with? Unmerited favor. Favor you don't deserve. Now, God is going to take those Jews and do them a favor they don't deserve. Think about it for just a moment. As you go back and you see God in the Garden of Eden created Adam and Eve, what they do? They sin. They were expelled out of the Garden of Eden. Then you start on down with mankind, and when you get down to Genesis, the 6th chapter, what do you find the whole world has done? They've turned away from God. God then destroyed the world, took Noah, and then you get down to Genesis 11, and what do you find again? The world is rebelling with the Tower of Babel. Now then, God says, now here's what I'm going to do. In chapter 12, the next chapter, I'm going to choose one man, Abraham, and I'm going to work through him, and I will set up a nation, and in this nation, through Abraham, I will bring in the Christ. So, Abraham, you and your children, now it's through them the Christ is going to be born. Would that put any responsibility on Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, 12 patriarchs, and on down, to say, you know, we're pretty special. We better behave ourselves because it's going to be through us that the Christ is going to come. So we better be pretty special, you see, that is in there. It should have, but it didn't. So they then turned, they became sinful. They committed every sin that you could think of in the Old Testament there, doing all these terrible things. But yet, Did Christ go ahead and bring in the Christ and set up this new system anyway? Yeah. Let me ask you a question. If you'd have given the Jews and the Gentiles what they deserved the day before Jesus was born, now we're going to give them what they deserve. What would you give them? Total damnation forever. That's what they deserve. Later in this book, we're going to find the wages of sin is what? Death. Total separation from God. So if you give them what they deserve, Christ would never have been born. He would never have come down and lived here and been maligned and persecuted and died on the cross if you give them what they deserve. But what God is doing, God says, I'm going to do them a favor they don't deserve. That's mercy. That's mercy. So God says, I'll do them a favor they don't deserve. I will pay the price myself. I will send my own son. He will go through all of this, and finally he will die so that these Jews, sinful, and these Gentiles, sinful, might be saved. Not a one of them deserve it. Every one of them, including Abraham, would have deserved to have been lost forever. But due to this attitude, this disposition that God had, and what we call it? Mercy. Due to this attitude he had, which is mercy, I'm going to do them a favor they don't deserve. And so, that then is what I mean up here, that this system, this new system, righteousness of God, where God's going to make you righteous, it's based entirely upon God's grace and man's faith. It's those two things whereby this system of religion is going to be based. Now this over here, under the old law, is what you'd call works of merit. Works of merit. Merit is when you are given something that you actually deserve. You deserve it. When your kids come home with a merit star for behaving in class, it's given to them because they paid the price that day. They buckled down and they did what they should do, and they deserved a star. They were good for that day, so they got a merit badge for that day. Now, that's what you got over here. If you kept the old law, what did you deserve? Remember, you'd be just like Christ. You'd be perfect. You would deserve to spend eternity then with God. So it's based on merit. Now, that's what that was. This over here is based on faith that works. Now, I want you to notice a word in there because we're going to use that word. That word, I guess, has caused more confusion in the religious world than any other word. When I say that, I know you could find another one that has, but that one has just caused so much confusion in the church as well as out of the church. Just so much confusion. What do you see that I've got up there on both of those systems? What word do I have in both systems? Works. In both of those systems, works are demanded. Now you say, well, what's the situation if works are demanded? We're going to be working on that. We're going to be showing that. Paul's going to be showing that as you get down there. But I want you to see it right now. Now, the first one, what kind of works are we doing? Works that are perfect. That's what we're going to be doing. Works that are perfect. What's the next kind of works we're going to be doing? Works that are based on faith. Right? That's kind of works that's over there. Now that's not perfect works. See? He's going to take imperfect people, people who haven't done what they should have done. And he said, now I'm going to save you by faith. Now when I'm saving you by faith, here's what I require. I require that you believe in me, this is Christ, you believe in me, and you obey me. If you believe that I'm the Son of God, you do what I tell you to do. Just that simple. When I tell you to do something big, you do it. But when I tell you to do something little, what do? You also do it. See? You also do it. And when you do that, does that make you perfect? No. No, that doesn't make you perfect. That just means that you believe in this situation right here. Let me kind of give you an illustration. Got any football fans in here that know anything about the Seahawks that happened to us yesterday? Well, you probably noticed that the quarterback, Hasselbeck, and the coach kind of having a little problems in there. In fact, they have this agreement, they told about that when Hasselbeck makes a mistake and he comes to the sideline, they don't talk to one another. He goes over here. They don't talk to each other for 45 seconds. And then in the 45 seconds, Hasselbeck is supposed to come over to the coach, and the coach says, "Now I told you so," see, or whatever they do. But there's a little conflict in here. Now, let's take a quarterback. Let's suppose that the quarterback was on a team, and he never, ever makes a mistake. He never throws the ball over a guy's head, never underthrows it, never throws anywhere else, never intercepted. He never makes a mistake. How valuable would that quarterback be? Oh, you just can't tell. He could go in, he could say, I want $100 million a year. People would pay it. Why would they pay $100 million a year for that kind of a quarterback? Because he deserves it. He deserves it. He never makes a mistake. But now, let's take Hasselbeck. He makes mistakes. They're at odds, one with the other. Now, suppose Holmgren comes to him, the coach, and says, "Now, look, here's all that I ask. I'm the coach. I'm in charge of this team. Do you believe I'm the coach? Yes. Do you believe I'm in charge of this team? Yes. Do you believe that I have authority? I'm the boss? Yes. Yes, I believe that. Okay. Now, to show that you believe that, what would he ask of the quarterback? Just do what I tell you. That's all he'd say. Do what I tell you. What happens when he says, "Now I want you to throw it to the receiver over on the right side." Hasselbeck goes over and he throws it to the receiver on the right side, but the receiver doesn't catch it. What about Hasselbeck? Fine, he did what the coach said. When he comes back in, the coach can't say, "You idiot, you." He did what the coach said. Everything, from here on, everything the coach tells Hasselbeck to do, he does it. But it doesn't work out. There's mistakes that are made. He's not a perfect quarterback. But does he have works? In other words, could you say that Hasselbeck would be a working quarterback? Yeah. What kind of a working quarterback? Not a perfect work quarterback, but one that does what the coach says. See? That really is the whole thing. Now, when the time comes up for talking about money, Hasselbeck says, "Hey, I want a raise. I want $100 million a year." What are you? That's a joke, Hasselbeck. That's a joke. You didn't win the Super Bowl. Yeah, but I did what you said. Yeah, but you don't merit. You haven't worked. You're not perfect for that $100 million. You did what I said. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Since you did what I told you to do, I'm going to give you $100 million a year. So he gives him $100 million a year with all of his mistakes. What would you say, what caused the coach to do that? Grace. He didn't deserve it. You see, we have this all around us. Everywhere around us, we have this thing happening. Now, this is going to be based over here on a faith that works in here. This system is you deserve it. This system over here is by God's grace. All right, with this behind us, Now, we'll go to the next verse next week. And he's going to start with each one of these words and going to start boiling them down. And this, to me, is the most exciting part of the book of Romans, because it just really gives you the total of what Christianity is all about. Okay, class dismissed.